Welcome. It's great to have you back for See for Yourself, Session 3. I hope you've managed to read chapters 6 to 11 of Mark's Gospel and jotted down any questions that might have jumped out at you. In the first session, we looked at the claim that Jesus is the Son of God. And in Session 2, we looked at Jesus, the Messiah, the one who dies on a cross. It's all part of God's plan, that he should die as a ransom for many. And in this third session, we're looking at Jesus' resurrection and what that means. And this is the third leg of the three-legged stool of Christian faith. So, let's see for yourself. The first thing to say is that Jesus' resurrection was predicted. If you turn to chapter 10, verse 32 to 34, you'll read there that Jesus and his disciples are on their way up to Jerusalem, and Jesus is leading the way. The disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. There was a sense of foreboding as they made their way up to Jerusalem. But Jesus is very clear as to what is going to happen. He took the 12 aside. He told them, "We are going up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They'll condemn him to death, hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise." So here we have the third main prediction Jesus made of his rising from the dead after his suffering and death. Now, people can make all kinds of claims for themselves, but how can they be proved? Jesus' resurrection is the final proof that his claims are true. If he's right about the truth of his own resurrection from the dead, then it's reasonable to believe that his words can be trusted when he speaks to us about other things too. The second thing to say is that Jesus' resurrection is recorded as fact. You turn to chapter 15, verse 42, and into 16 and verse 8. You'll find that Mark insists that Jesus' resurrection is set in history. He's not writing fiction like Peter Pan in Neverland. And he mentions real people, such as Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, who's found in records outside the Bible, and Joseph and Mary Magdalene. And then there's a real tomb. Jesus was placed there physically. It was sealed on Good Friday. It was empty on Easter Sunday. And he mentions real witnesses. "But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." The other Gospels record Jesus' meetings with his disciples and Peter over a period of 40 days. And Jesus gave them many convincing proofs that he was alive. They were all doubters at first, but Jesus spoke to them and ate with them. They saw him, heard him, and touched him. In the book of Acts, Peter, who once denied Jesus, now declares to the crowd, "God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of it." So the gospel writers and disciples make it very clear Jesus rose physically from the dead in time and space, in history. And then the resurrection declares the truth about Jesus. In chapter 9, verses 7 to 10, we read of another place where Jesus speaks about rising from the dead. After 3 disciples catch a glimpse of Jesus' glory on a mountain, they hear God speaking, "This is my Son whom I love, listen to him." But it's only they who see and hear this. And Jesus tells them not to tell anyone until the Son of Man has risen from the dead. And they keep the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. But after Jesus has risen, they declare it loud and clear. Peter does so to a crowd in Jerusalem. He says this, "The God of our fathers has glorified his servant Jesus. You handed him over to be killed, and you disowned him before Pilate, though he had decided to let him go. You killed the author of life, but God raised him from the dead." So through the resurrection, God is declaring Jesus to be his Son, the author of life, and the real and true Messiah. And then Jesus' resurrection declares the truth about our future. In chapter 12, verses 18 to 27, we read that there's going to be a future resurrection for all. In this section, the Sadducees clash with Jesus about the belief in a resurrection. They try to mock the idea with a little scenario. But Jesus insists, "You are in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God," he says. And he goes on to teach that the dead will rise one day. His resurrection is the first of many. This is great hope. Death is not the end. Jesus has conquered death and guarantees that he will one day raise everyone up. And then Jesus' resurrection declares the truth about a judgment for all. In chapter 14, verses 61 to 62, we read about Jesus being on trial before the Jewish rulers. The high priest asks him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus says, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." So Jesus in this scene is being judged by the chief priests, but here he declares that he, as Son of Man, will return one day in person with power and glory as the judge of all. He says something similar in chapter 8, verse 38. "If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." He's coming again to judge everyone. And later on, Peter will explain this to a Roman centurion in the book of Acts. And he'll say, Jesus commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that he is the one whom God appointed as judge of the living and the dead. And Jesus' resurrection declares the truth about a future kingdom for all his people. In chapter 14, verse 24 to 25, it's a time during the Last Supper with his disciples, and Jesus takes some wine and says, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." So Jesus here is describing a future kingdom, the kingdom of God, as a place of joy and celebration, drinking the fruit of the vine. In chapter 10 and verse 30, he describes it as the age to come. Jesus' miracles, therefore, are signposts to that future kingdom, where there'll be no more sickness or sorrow or death. And just as Jesus' body was raised up in resurrection, the whole world will one day be raised up and made new. This is hope for the world, for all who will believe in Jesus. It's hope for you and me today. All this makes sense of Jesus' title, Son of Man. I wonder if you've asked the question, why does Jesus call himself that? Well, it's taken from the prophet Daniel in the Old Testament. In Daniel chapter 7, he says this: "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." And the question is, what do you have to do to have this hope? How can we belong to this everlasting kingdom ruled by Jesus? Well, come along next week for the final session, when we'll be looking at that very question. So in session 1, we saw how Jesus is the Son of God. That's the first leg of the three-legged stool. In session 2, we saw how Jesus, as the Messiah, died on the cross as a ransom for many. And that's the second leg. And in this session, we've seen why Jesus' resurrection is so crucial and all that it means for us and for the future. For next time, please read Mark chapters 12 to 16 and jot down any questions to ask either the person who invited you on this course, or send them in to emmanuel.lefwich@gmail.com. And I look forward to seeing you in session 4.